Welcome. Today we're going to take a look at the comma rule for how writers can use commas to identify places and addresses. So let's take a look at this. There are a couple of different places where writers will use commas in their sentences to identify places and addresses. The first one is that you use a comma to separate the city and state. The next one is that you use a comma to separate the city and the country. And then the last example is that you separate name, address, and city with a comma. Now, let's look at the specifics here so that we can see some examples. This usually helps. So here my first example. I grew up in Evergreen, Colorado, but I moved to Denver, Colorado when I was 20. I've got the city, Evergreen, the state, Colorado. Those are separated with this comma. And again, Denver is a city, Colorado is a state. I've separated these two, with this comma. Let's look at another example. Did you ever visit San Francisco, California? Got the city here, San Francisco. The state is California, and they're separated with this comma. We bought a little place in Burlington, Vermont. Burlington is a city. Vermont is a state. And there's a comma in between the two. All right, here's another variation of this. We're going to separate city from country. I've been to Paris, France, and London, England, but only for short trips. So Paris is a city, France is a country, and we've got this comma in between the two to separate them. And here, London is a city, England is a country, and the comma is in between the two to separate them. Now this is important to note. This only applies to when you are writing in a sentence. This does not apply to when you're filling out an address on, say, an envelope or something like that. But when you list the full address in a sentence, a comma between the city and state is not necessary. So let's look at these examples. Marva Jackson, please mail the package to Marva Jackson, 123 Main Street, Lincoln, Massachusetts, 80229. Marva Jackson's the name. We have a comma to separate the name from the street address, 123 Main Street, and then we have a comma to separate city, state, and zip. But we did not put a comma here in between city and state, and the reason is because of this rule that we don't need one when we have the entire address in a sentence. So again, this does not apply to filling out an envelope or writing an address in that way. This only applies to sentences. And our last example, my aunt's address is 908 Maple Lane, Rochester, New York, 48203. So 908 Maple Lane, that's the street address. We've got a comma that's separating the street address from the city and state, Rochester, New York. And note here, we did not put a comma in between the city and state in that sentence, and it's only because it's in the sentence. If we were filling out an envelope to mail something to this aunt, we would include the comma in between Rochester and New York. Okay, I hope that information is helpful to you, and good luck with your writing.